Have you ever heard of the 90% rule? Or maybe the 99% rule? I know I hadn't until I stumbled on this book written by a 3-time world record holder. Lado Dittmar is his name. He was a totally average Joe, and now he's in the Cirque du Soleil. He started at 17, was laughed at by all his peers, and he beat all the odds and literally went from zero to hero. Whereas most of us, including him, are what he calls non-naturals. He personally studied and followed naturals, and he realized that the way they approach progress and practice is completely different from us non-naturals. Lado talks about how embracing this naturals mindset really fast-tracked his progress. These ideas really push back against some of the things we believe to be true. I really like the last one, but it makes more sense once you've heard the first two. Instead of trying to get the last 10%, move on. Now, we all know that humans are evolved to adapt. When you're first learning a song or even a new skill, say tapping, string bending, raking, we always make the biggest progress at the start. And that's because there's so much to overcome. Our body's not used to these new movements. Here's Lado's analogy. So imagine this coil is your body. When you first start learning, say, a skill, you're putting a lot of stress on your body. But as you get better, there's less and less stress being put on your body until eventually there's very little to no stress at all. So say you're trying to learn fast downpicking. In the beginning, your body's forced to adapt quickly and try to keep up with the downpicking. But as you become better, it becomes harder to see gains. Lado says that this last 10% is the hardest to overcome. Our body's not being put under enough stress to adapt quickly, so that last 10% takes forever to reach. Lado talks about this percentage as consistency. So say you're able to pull off the downpicking in this riff 90% of the time. Instead of trying to get it right all the time, move on to something similar that's 10 to 15% harder. In this case, maybe a downpicking riff that's a bit trickier. Lado says that the goal is to get this second thing 90% consistent. Then you'll easily get the first thing 100% of the time. I feel like every guitarist knows the feeling of this part of a song that we just can't get to full speed, and it's so frustrating. So learning that moving on, then coming back is a better solution is a revelation. I actually did this without knowing it, because early on I picked Stevie Ray Vaughan's Mary Had a Little Lamb solo, Slash's Sweet Child of Mine solo, and there were riffs in that I spent countless hours trying to learn at slow speed and just never could get it right. What's funny is I'd play the solo every few months, realize I still couldn't play those licks, and move on. These licks both use string bending, and eventually, after trying to learn a bunch of other solos with string bending, I came back and I could play those licks, even after not touching them for months. When we practice, we should warm up, play some easy stuff, get into harder stuff, and then save the hardest stuff for last, right? That's not how the naturals do it. Naturals start with the 1%. Science says that today, we will do things 99% the same as we did yesterday. It's in human nature to want to avoid loss, so we often start with songs that we already know, things that are already familiar to us. But the thing is, our energy and focus is at its peak, at the start of every practice session. Naturals will practice the hard stuff, the stuff that's just out of reach, right at the start of their practice, as soon as they're warm. Essentially, as soon as it's safe for them to do so. Through the session, as your energy level and focus start to go down, then you can practice some of your routines. Lado says that the reason why only naturals will start with the hardest stuff is because of a difference in mindset. Non-naturals want to talk about how much time we spent practicing, or what routines we practiced. I know I'm guilty of that. Naturals are motivated by gains. They're focused on progress. They're focused on what specific results were achieved, regardless of how much time we practiced. And that difference in mindset is really fascinating. Again, Lado talks about how embracing the naturals mindset really created huge progress for him. Professional classical musicians will often practice 90 minutes at a time. This is because they realize that their productivity goes down after that. This is the same reason why a lot of classes in school don't go over 90 minutes. Or if they do, you get a break in between. I touched on this, but Lado likes to talk about high, medium, and low focus and energy. When levels are high, naturals like to work on the hard stuff. What's interesting is that he realized what was most productive for him was to stop practicing even before the low energy hit. This is a man who would practice 10 to 12 hours a day sometimes, and yet he still liked to space his practice out. And of course, he picked this up from the naturals. I feel like this sheds light on why so many pros might say that practicing, say, an hour a day, maybe 15 minutes for 4 times a day, is almost just as productive, if not more, than practicing 1 3-hour session a day. For me, this really speaks to the idea of practicing smarter, not harder. That you can make more guitar progress playing fewer hours a day, but just spaced out more. I really want to hear from you on this one. What do you think?